So Sherry is asking, did Rahab continue to be a prostitute after she saved the spies and was spared?
It's a wonderful question, and the more I dug into it and thought about it, the more I just realized actually what an incredible person Rahab is, and I'm so grateful that her story is recorded in the Bible. And most of us always do think of her just as a prostitute, and that's kind of like the first impression we get of her. And she sort of drifts off into obscurity after that for most of us, but she doesn't in the Bible. She is there, and there's a much deeper, amazing story when we really probe deeper and read a little bit behind the lines. So we are told she is a prostitute. This is in Joshua 2, verse 1, talking about how the spies were sent out and they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab. There is a movement of people who want to argue that the word there for prostitute actually should be a word for innkeeper, because she does seem to be a very industrious woman. And she, would make sense that the spies came and stayed at an inn and she was running the place and, putting the weed on top and all that stuff. But it, as we'll see in other verses confirm she was a prostitute, and like the writers of Hebrews, other biblical writers call her a prostitute. Clearly, even in Greek, uses the word that from which we get pornography from the same Greek root word there. So no mistaking, everybody's pretty sure she was a prostitute until recently. But let's go to now Joshua 6:25. This is a story. This comes to right after Jericho is shaken and destroyed. It says Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua who had sent the spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. And I mean, obviously not to this day, but as of the day that this record was written, she was alive. And that was a big deal, right? Here you have a Canaanite woman who, the Israelites were more or less told, hey, be distrusting of Canaanites and don't intermarry and keep your distance from them. And here she lives among the Israelites. So we're told she sort of became a part of that group and traveled with them as they went and populated the land of Canaan and conquered it. Hebrews 11 is known as sort of the Hall of Fame of faith. And she is one of those people who specifically named for her faith. It says in Hebrews 11:31, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. Now, this is not telling us she never sinned again. She never went back to prostitution and all that. But it's interesting how she's listed with a long list of faithful people. Then we come to James 2:25. James says, in the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction. So again, she's not saying she was righteous or always righteous, but that she demonstrated it at that time at Jericho. And if we read through the lines here and understand the parallels and patterns, we see that Rahab's experience with Jericho is very similar to another person of faith. And that she and her family, think about it, they found refuge from destruction that wiped out her entire town, the entire city of Jericho, which was a massive city. It was completely destroyed except for all who went into the confines of her home. And it very much mirrors that experience of Noah and his family, who found refuge from destruction in the confines of the ark that he built. And similar with the Exodus story, she and her family are in a sense called out of the pagan, corrupt world of the Canaanites. And she now begins this new life as part of God's holy family, who are separated from the rest of the world. And she, as we saw, continued to live among them. So how do we know that she really integrated with Israel? And probably, I would say, how do we know that she probably never went back to prostitution? Like, let's first ask, why would a woman end up in prostitution back then? It could be where maybe she had a husband and husband died. Maybe her dad sold her into prostitution to make money. She was sort of enslaved into it. There could be different reasons. And odds were, if she had been married, if she had a husband to protect her, provide for her, she would not have had to live that life. She would not want to live that life. And we have an interesting appearance of one more interesting appearance of Rahab in the Bible. And this is in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. And this is the lineage of Jesus Christ. And we're told about, I'm going to start at Judah because there's some interesting names that pop in there too. So let's start at verse 3 of chapter 1 of Matthew. It says, Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Remember this, who was a woman who had to trick Judah to sleep with her so that she could have kids, because she was not provided a son who would then, she married one of Judah's sons. He died without giving her a son, and the Bible provided that she was entitled to have a son through that family, and Judah didn't live up to giving her the son. Well, he gave her one of the sons, and the son slept with her, but then intentionally pulled out before she would get pregnant, and God killed him because of that evil. That basically was tantamount to rape that he was doing, just sleep with her for his own pleasure rather than for the true purpose of it. And so fascinating that she's in this list, the lineage of Jesus. Then we go to her sons. So she has Perez and Zerah. It says, then Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Amminadab. Amminadab begot Nahshon. Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab. And it says, and Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. So right here we see this Boaz. We all know the story of Ruth, right? And Ruth marries Boaz. And Ruth was a Moabite. So she wasn't an Israelite. She was a Moabite. She marries an Israelite, and he dies. And then she goes back to town, follows her mother-in-law, and then marries Boaz, who is related to his mother-in-law, who then had the right to claim ownership of the dead husband's things, including Ruth, which he does. Boaz, as a nice, amazing man, does that. And it's just fascinating that Boaz was the son of Salmon, who probably was actually Rahab's husband. So Boaz, this famous Boaz of the Bible, was the son of Rahab. And now we understand, why was Rahab so open-minded to marrying Ruth? Because his mom was a Canaanite, was a foreigner that was welcomed into the Israelites. So here he welcomes then Ruth, now also a foreigner. And it's then this lineage of two foreign women that we then get Jesse, who begat David, the King David. So it's just, and David obviously then is one of Christ's progenitors, and most famously so, right? Jesus, the son of David. So this whole important lineage, Rahab is a part of it. And I don't think it's a mistake, right? God doesn't make mistakes like that. But God is just showing how he can take our mistakes, blot them out, ignore them, and still use our mistakes to work great good. And that makes me think of this one Bible verse that's kind of controversial at times, right? 1 Timothy 2, verse 14, it says, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman, referring to Eve, was deceived and became a transgressor. Yet she was saved through childbearing if they continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control. A lot of people like to, and this is the ESV version, by the way, that I read there. It varies from version to version. But the ESV, I feel like, quite well sort of paints the picture here of how Eve will be saved through childbearing. And it's not because Eve, because she had children, God will decide, okay, yeah, I'll save you and let you live. No, it's because of the lineage of the Messiah would come through Eve and would come through these other women, the names that we just talked about, like Ruth, Rahab, Tamar. They're the ones who, even under having horrible backgrounds, horrible lives, still looks like turned to lives of righteousness, raised good kids. Again, look at Boaz. Boaz is, a lot of people consider Boaz as one of the most astounding examples by which a man should aspire to live by. This is Rahab's son. And so we see, the holy lineage but from which Christ comes from, then coming through these women raising good kids, good God-fearing kids. And we owe a lot to, I think, Rahab and what she did. And I'm grateful for the Bible for sort of continuing the story, not leaving us to wonder what happened to Ruth, but just even be wowed that our Savior came through her line. So, Tina, anything else that you'd like to add to this?
Sure. I mean, and also, I don't know if I heard you mention it or not, but yeah, Jesus came through the line of Rahab. I mean, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. And I guess what I think about when I, think of the story of Rahab and just how beautiful it is, and makes me think, I don't think she stayed a prostitute, and this is my reasoning. God's people have been. God likens His church to a woman, and He likens His church in the book of Hosea as basically a harlot. And if you read that story of Hosea and Gomer, where God says, "Go marry a woman who is a harlot, who's a prostitute," and she just causes him all these problems. And basically, God says, "This is how you are to me. Like, I married you as my people, and yet you just go and cheat on me and do all these things that are terrible and hurt me." But then by the end of the book, when you look at Hosea chapter 14, you see basically how Hosea the prophet goes and buys her and says, "She's mine. I'm going to take you home and you're going to be my wife." Again, he restores her to himself as his wife. And because of that, it changed her to be a good woman and a good wife going forward. And I really see that the story of Rahab is basically likened to God's church. Like, God's church, or even God's people who didn't know God, and they're kind of in the world and they're doing things that are wrong. But God is saying, "I want to restore you into the image of who you are, which is my people." And so, and I really believe that when we're restored into the image of God, like, we don't continue in sin. And that's really where, that doctrine comes, is you can have victory over sin. You don't have to keep sinning and going off into the wrong path, because when you're restored into the image of God and God lives in your heart and works in your life, you don't continue in sin. And Paul talks about that too in the book of Romans. Like, should we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. Absolutely not. And I really think that Rahab's heart was changed when she became an Israelite.
And we're even assuming she was really eager to do prostitution. Like, oh, I really love it. This is what I want to do. Like, how many women is it? So. Maybe she really always was yearning for that husband. And once, Jericho's destroyed, she can then and meet some of the Israelites. Maybe, in fact, some people speculate, maybe Salmon, who she married, was one of the spies. Like, maybe
it's possible.
Yeah, we have no way to know for sure, right? But it makes an interesting Hollywood film if that was the case, right? So,
but sure. But I think the Bible is so symbolic in all of its stories. Like, every story, you see so much symbolism, and you see the story of redemption, you see the story of Jesus basically, and you see that I believe in the story of Rahab and the spies. Like, she wasn't good in a sense, but she something touched her heart and she turned to the right way. And she
may have always been
to
sensitive
the right way
to God.
God elevates us.
Because when she even met the Israelites, she's like, "Oh, you're God's servants, right?" And then takes care of them, fearing Yahweh, when the rest of Jericho probably would not have.
Yeah.
And she managed to convince her family to get in that room too with her.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things there. Anyways, but yeah, I don't think she stayed a prostitute. I think she
Definitely
was
not.
elevated, and God, that's always God's goal, is to restore us into God's image, restore our hearts, restore us in every aspect of the word restoration. So